I've lived in the mountains all my life, but nothing prepared me for the terror of that night. The storm rolled over the ridgeline with a fury that shook the very bones of the earth, rain slashing sideways, lightning clawing at the sky. My boots sank deep in the mud as I pushed through the pines, guided only by a sound that froze me in place, an animal's cry, thin and desperate, cutting through the thunder like a child's sob. I followed it into the shadows and found a young gorilla, no bigger than a boy of 10, tangled in the cruel snare of poachers. Its chest heaved, eyes wide with terror, and then I heard it, heavy breathing behind me. Something else was there, watching. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The mountains are my home, my blood, and my curse. Folks call me Jack Harlan, the mountain man, the one who traps his own food, fells his own timber, and walks alone where most won't dare. But solitude has a way of teaching you to listen, and on nights like this one, the forest whispered warnings in every shiver of the wind. I had set out before dusk, just to check the ridgeline. I'd seen signs these past weeks that didn't sit right with me. Broken branches in patterns no storm had made, prints in the mud that didn't belong to deer, bear, or elk. And more troubling still, the animals I knew like neighbors were restless. Squirrels abandoned their usual chatter. Black bears stayed far from their berry thickets. Even the elk, bold as kings in rutting season, kept to the shadows. And then came that cry. At first I thought it was the wind ripping through a hollow, but the sound rose again, too sharp, too filled with pain. I followed it down into a narrow gully where the rainwater had gathered into a rushing stream. That's when I saw it, the gorilla. Now I know what you're thinking. Gorillas don't belong in the Appalachians. But years back, a wildlife research center set up not 10 miles from my cabin. They brought in a small group, raised in semi-captivity, meant to study how these great beasts adapt to forest life far from their native jungles. Most folks scoffed, but I'd caught glimpses now and then. Broad-shouldered silhouettes moving through the fog, black eyes glinting from the timberline. They kept to themselves, and I let them be. Until now. This little one was trapped, its leg caught in a steel snare buried beneath the wet leaves. The cruel jaws had cut deep, blood darkening the mud. Every time it struggled, the teeth bit tighter. Its cries rattled through the valley, frantic, pleading. I knelt beside it, rain soaking through my coat, and the young gorilla shrank back, teeth bared, half in terror, half in instinct. But then our eyes met, and I swear to you, in that moment, I saw not an animal, but a child begging for mercy. "Easy there," I whispered, my voice rough with the storm. "I ain't here to hurt you." I pulled my hunting knife from my belt. The blade gleamed white in the lightning flash. The gorilla whimpered, but didn't move. Carefully, I reached for the trap, pressing down on the spring, feeling the cruel steel resist beneath my calloused palms. That's when I heard it, the sound that turned my blood to ice. A branch snapped behind me. Not the sharp crack of a squirrel leaping, not the shuffle of a deer's hooves. This was heavy, deliberate, slow. I froze, hands still on the trap, rain dripping from my beard. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Only the storm moved, howling through the treetops. Then another step, closer. A wet inhale, deep and guttural, like air rasping through a cavern. The gorilla cub whimpered louder, as if it too sensed what I did, that we weren't alone. I straightened, knife still in hand, and turned. Shadows shifted between the trees, too large for a man, too sinuous for a bear. My gut clenched. This was the same presence I'd felt for weeks. The reason the animals fled. The reason the forest seemed wrong. But I couldn't walk away. Not with the little one trapped, bleeding. I crouched again, forcing the trap open with a grunt until the steel jaws finally gave way. The cub scrambled free, dragging its wounded leg, then collapsed in the mud beside me. Its chest rose and fell in frantic bursts, but its eyes, those black, liquid eyes, locked on me with something I'll never forget. Trust. I didn't have time to savor it. The thing in the dark moved again. Branches bowed, and the rain seemed to hush as a shape slid forward, a ripple of muscle and scales glistening in the lightning. My heart slammed against my ribs. A python. A damn python in these mountains. Impossible, and yet there it was, thick as a man's torso, its coils writhing like the river itself had come alive. I'd heard whispers of exotic animals let loose by careless men, creatures smuggled, abandoned, or escaped from cages, but never had I seen one this size. And it was hunting. The young gorilla let out a strangled cry, clinging to my leg. Instinct roared louder than fear. I raised my knife, every nerve screaming that this was a fight I couldn't win. But in these mountains, you don't turn your back on the helpless, not if you call yourself a man. Come on then, I growled, planting my boots in the mud, knife steady despite the storm. If it's me or the cub, you'll have to take me first. The serpent's head rose above the ferns, eyes cold, tongue tasting the rain. And as the storm thundered overhead, I knew the quiet life I'd once led in these mountains was gone. From this night forward, nothing would ever be the same. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the mountains hushed and sullen, as though the forest itself were catching its breath. Mist clung low over the valley, rolling in ghostly waves between the pines. My cabin smelled of damp wood and smoke from the fire I had stoked through the night. The young gorilla lay curled on an old wool blanket near the hearth, shivering now and then, its small chest rising with shallow breaths. Its leg was swollen where the trap had cut. I'd done what I could, cleaned the wound with hot water, packed it with herbs my grandmother once used on me when I was a boy, and bound it with strips of linen torn from a shirt. But I wasn't a doctor. All I had were rough hands and a stubborn heart. I crouched beside it, listening to the faint whistle of its breath. The firelight flickered across its black fur, drying the rain still clinging there. For the first time since last night, I allowed myself to breathe. But the relief didn't last long. On the cabin's wooden floor, near the door, I saw it. Mud tracked across the planks. Not the small, careful prints of the gorilla cub, but heavy boots. Fresh. Too fresh. I rose slowly, the weight of it pressing down on me. Hunters had been here. I stepped outside, rifle slung across my back, knife at my hip. The air was sharp with pine and damp earth. The ground told the story clear as words. 3 men, moving slow, circling my cabin like wolves around a deer. Their tracks weren't careless. They knew how to stalk. And on the tree nearest the trail, I found the mark. A crude carving with the edge of a blade, the shape of a serpent coiled around a cross. I'd seen it before. The hunters in these mountains weren't just after deer or bear. They were after anything they could sell: skins, tusks, claws, even creatures that didn't belong here. And when they left a mark, it meant one thing. They were claiming territory. I spat in the dirt, anger boiling in my gut. The cub stirred inside, letting out a soft whimper. My chest tightened. They'd set the snare for its mother, no doubt, maybe the whole troop. and if I'd stumbled onto one trap, there were others. I should have called Sarah, the ranger. She'd know what to do. But a part of me resisted. Out here, law came late and often too little. If hunters had brought a python into these woods, hell, if they'd been breeding them or selling them, then the fight wasn't about wildlife anymore. It was about control. I walked the tree line that day, tracing their paths, eyes sharp. Found 2 more snares, hidden cruel in the brush. One baited with fresh meat, another camouflaged under ferns. My knife made short work of both. Every cut of steel was a promise, not while I breathe. By afternoon, clouds broke and sunlight spilled golden over the ridge. I carried the cub outside to feel the warmth, setting it down gently on the porch. Its eyes darted around, cautious, but it didn't try to run. It clung close to me, as though I were its anchor. "Guess we're stuck with each other now," I muttered, stroking its coarse fur. It blinked up at me, and I swear there was recognition there. But peace never lasts in these mountains. A shot rang out, sharp, too close. The cub flinched, clambering against my leg. I scanned the ridgeline, heart hammering. Smoke curled from a rise 200 yards out, where a man with a rifle stood just long enough for me to see him before he melted back into the trees. A warning. I carried the cub inside, bolted the door. My mind raced. They knew I had it. They'd come for it soon enough. And I wasn't fool enough to think they'd spare me. That night, as the fire crackled low, I sat with the cub beside me, listening to the night sounds. An owl hooted. A fox barked down in the hollow. But beneath it all, I felt it. The silence of animals gone missing. The woods weren't right. I remembered my father's voice, rough as gravel, the night he caught me as a boy trying to free a raccoon from a trap. "Every creature deserves a chance, son. If you can give it, you do." That's what makes a man. Looking at the cub, I felt the truth of those words burn in me. Whatever came, hunters, serpents, even the mountain itself, this little life was under my care now. Toward dawn, I heard movement on the porch. Heavy steps, boards creaking under weight. I rose silently, rifle in hand. Through the slats of the window, I saw a shadow lean close to the door. Fingers brushed the wood, tracing the grain, then rapped twice, slow, deliberate. I held my breath, heart pounding like a drum. The shadow lingered, then moved off into the trees. When daylight came, I stepped outside. The dirt was marked with boot prints leading away, but not before leaving something behind. On the porch rail, tied with a strip of leather, hung a warning. A strip of gorilla fur, matted with blood. The cub whimpered when it saw it, and my stomach turned to stone. The message was clear. The hunters wanted me to know. They had more, and if I didn't back off, I'd be next. But fear and I parted ways a long time ago. I took down the strip of fur, clenched it in my fist, and swore into the morning air. "You want me? Come and take me. But you'll not touch this one again." The mountains echoed the words back, carrying them through the mist. And for the first time in years, I felt the forest not as a place I lived in, but as a battlefield. The mountains woke slow that morning, wrapped in fog so thick it felt like walking through a dream. I sat on the porch steps with the gorilla cub leaning against my side, its small frame trembling each time the wind rattled through the pines. Its wound was healing, but not fast enough, and I knew I couldn't keep it hidden forever. I offered it a piece of apple I'd sliced thin. At first it bared its teeth, uncertain. Then, slowly, it reached out with long fingers, took the fruit, and chewed with wide, suspicious eyes fixed on me. When the sweetness hit, it let out a soft, almost human hum. For a moment I forgot about the hunters, the python, even the strip of fur they'd left as warning. But reality has a way of creeping back. By mid-morning, I saddled my old mule and tucked the cub into a heavy canvas bag lined with wool. It protested at first, gripping my arm until I whispered, "Easy, little one. We'll be back before sundown." I wasn't taking it far, just down the valley to where Sarah sometimes patrolled. She'd been a ranger here for years, sharp-eyed and stubborn, one of the few who still believed the gorillas deserved a chance. If anyone could help me figure out what to do next, it was her. The trail was slick from last night's storm, pine needles clinging to my boots. Every step felt heavier, as if the forest itself were watching. Birds had returned, but they sang quiet, uncertain, and somewhere deep in the hollow, I swore I heard the faint hiss of scales sliding over wet stone. I shook it off. I had enough to worry about without chasing ghosts. Halfway down the trail, I stopped at the creek to let the mule drink. The cub crawled from the bag, weak but curious, its hands slapping the water, splashing like a child. For the first time since I'd found it, it let out a small hoot, playful, and I laughed despite myself. "Careful," I warned, scooping it up before the current could take it. "You're not ready for the wild just yet." That's when I heard the whistle. Short, sharp, familiar, Sarah's signal. I turned, and there she was, emerging from the trees with her ranger hat tilted low, shotgun slung across her shoulder. She looked me over, then looked at the bundle in my arms. Her eyes widened. "Jack," she said, voice low but steady. "Tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing." I shifted, shielding the cub. It was caught in a trap. Hunters. If I hadn't been there, it'd be dead by now. Her jaw clenched. She set her shotgun against a tree and stepped closer. The cub whimpered, pressing its face into my chest. Sarah's expression softened. "You brought it out alive," she whispered. "I didn't think, She trailed off, shaking her head. "Most men wouldn't bother." I shrugged, though the weight of her words sat heavy in me. "Most men don't live by the same rules I do." She studied me for a moment, then crouched to examine the wound. Her hands were gentle, practiced. "You did good with the herbs, but it'll need more. Antibiotics, maybe stitches," she sighed. "Problem is, if we take it to the facility, those hunters will know. They've got eyes everywhere." "Already do," I muttered, remembering the bloody fur on my porch. Sarah's face darkened. "Then we need to move fast. If they know you've got the cub, they'll come for it. And they won't care if you're in the way." I looked down at the little gorilla clinging to me, its wide eyes darting between us. I felt its trust like a weight, binding me tighter than any chain. Then I guess they'll have to get through me first. We spent the afternoon by the creek, working in silence. Sarah cleaned the wound again, this time with the supplies she carried. Iodine, bandages, a small vial of antibiotics she injected with steady hands. The cub winced but didn't fight, as though it understood she meant no harm. "You know," she said after a while, "these gorillas were never supposed to be here long. Just a research project, temporary, but they adapted better than anyone expected. Some of us think they could make a life here. Others, well, they see dollar signs like those hunters," I said. She nodded grimly. "Exactly like them." The cub drifted to sleep against my chest, its breath warm, its weight strangely comforting. I stroked its fur absently, staring into the mist rising from the water. I thought I was done fighting battles, I admitted, voice low. After all these years in the mountains, I figured I'd earned some peace. But then I hear its cry, see the trap biting into its leg, and I can't turn away. Sarah looked at me then, eyes sharp and kind all at once. That's why you're the one who found it, Jack. You don't turn away. Not from people, not from animals, not from anything that needs saving. Her words cut deeper than I cared to admit. We parted ways as the sun dipped low, the sky bleeding orange through the trees. Sarah promised to check in soon, to bring more supplies if needed. Keep it safe, she said, resting a hand on my shoulder. And Jack, watch your back. They won't stop now. Back at the cabin, the cub stirred awake as I laid it on the blanket near the fire. It looked at me with heavy-lidded eyes, reached out one long arm, and touched my hand with its fingers. I froze. The gesture so simple, so human it broke something inside me. I curled my hand around its rough calluses against soft fur and whispered, "You're safe here. As long as I stand, you're safe." The fire crackled, the night deepened, and though danger pressed in from every shadow, I felt something stir in me I hadn't known in years. Not just duty, not just survival, hope. The valley has its own voice if you know how to listen. By day it hums with birdsong and the chatter of squirrels, but by night, silence is a language of its own. And silence had settled heavy across the land these past nights, a silence that pressed against my chest like a stone. I'd grown up in these mountains, raised on the rhythm of the forest. I could tell a storm by the way the leaves flipped in the wind, or a bear by the weight of its step. But what I felt now wasn't weather or wildlife. It was the kind of quiet that meant something unnatural was moving through the trees. The cub knew it too. Every time darkness crept in, it grew restless, pacing the cabin floor, pressing its little body against me like I was the only thing keeping it safe. When the night wind carried faint whistles, hunters' signals, I felt its trembling, the deep instinct in its bones. I wasn't sleeping much. On the third night, I left the cub curled by the fire and stepped out into the cool dark. The moon hung low, a silver coin caught in a tangle of branches. My rifle rested easy in my hands, but I knew bullets wouldn't fix what was coming. The woods were alive with absence. No owls, no foxes, no rustle of deer in the underbrush. Just the crunch of my boots on fallen needles. Then, faint in the distance, I heard it. A low chest beat, the hollow thud echoing through the valley. A gorilla's call. They were close. Watching. I eased toward the ridge that overlooked the valley floor. From there, the world stretched out in a patchwork of shadows and mist. My breath caught when I saw them. Dark shapes moving slow between the trees, too fluid to be deer, too organized to be wild bears. Hunters. At least 4, maybe more. Lantern light bobbed faintly, throwing long, crooked shadows. They carried packs and rifles and cages. A sickness rose in my gut. Cages meant they weren't just hunting for trophies. They were planning to take the gorillas alive, sell them, break them, turn their strength into profit. I crouched low, heart pounding, and then I heard it. Another sound threading through the night. Not human. The gorillas were there too, higher up in the valley. Their hoots and chest beats rolled across the hills, louder now, agitated. They knew they were being hunted. I didn't dare make a sound. I just watched, torn between two instincts. The part of me that wanted to storm down there and fight, and the part that knew if I showed my face now, I'd lead those bastards straight back to my cabin, straight to the cub. The hunters set their traps with mechanical precision, crouching low, whispering. I could almost smell the iron and grease of their snares from where I stood. Then one of them tilted his head back, and the lantern caught his face. A scarred jaw, cold eyes. I knew him. Earl Maddox. We'd crossed paths years ago when he ran dogs through these woods chasing bears, leaving carcasses to rot where they fell. I'd broken his traps more than once, and once, long ago, I'd put a warning shot in the dirt at his feet. His smile that day had promised it wasn't finished between us. Now here he was, back in my valley, and I knew damn well this time he wasn't just hunting animals. He was hunting me. I crept backward, slow, careful, every sense screaming. Once I'd put enough distance between us, I turned and moved fast, almost running down the trail toward the cabin. When I pushed through the door, the cub scrambled to me, whimpering, clutching at my leg. Its wide eyes searched my face as though it could see the fear I tried to hide. "It's all right," I whispered, stroking its fur though my hands shook. "You're safe. I won't let him take you." But my words felt hollow. The next morning, I walked the valley again, daylight filtering gold through the branches. The hunters were gone, their traps hidden. I found 2 steel-jawed monsters baited with fresh fruit. Clever. They knew gorillas' tastes. I smashed both with a rock until the springs snapped. But I knew there'd be more. Always more. Back at the cabin, I found the cub sitting by the window, staring into the trees. Its tiny fists beat lightly against its chest, uncertain, like a child mimicking an adult. My throat tightened. Somewhere out there, its family was calling, and it could feel it. That afternoon, Sarah arrived. She'd come quiet, no engine noise, just her boots on the trail. Her face hardened when I told her about Maddox. "I've heard his name," she said, jaw tight. "Been running game across state lines. Dangerous man, Jack. If he's here, he won't stop until he gets what he came for." Her eyes fell to the cub, who pressed closer to me when she approached. She crouched low, speaking soft, and after a long moment, the little one reached out and touched her hand. Her face softened, but her voice was sharp when she looked at me. "You can't do this alone." I bristled, the old mountain stubbornness rising in me. "I've handled worse." "Not like this," she shot back. "These men are organized. They'll track you, outnumber you, outgun you. You need help, ooh." The cub made a small sound, half whimper, half growl. I felt its grip tighten on my arm, and the decision pressed on me like the weight of the mountain itself. "Help or no help," I said finally. "They're not getting this little one." Not while I'm breathing. Sarah studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we'll fight smart." "But Jack, this valley isn't just yours anymore. It belongs to them too." That night, as darkness swallowed the forest once more, I sat by the fire with the cub tucked against me. Its heartbeat thudded against my ribs, steady and fragile. Out in the valley, the gorillas called again, their chest beats echoing like drums of war. The hunters would be back. I could feel it in the silence between heartbeats, and I knew, sooner or later, the shadows would come right to my door. The rain came down like the mountains themselves were grieving. Cold, heavy, unrelenting. It beat against the roof of my cabin, rattled the shutters, and poured off the eaves in silver streams. Inside, the fire sputtered, smoke curling low, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on the little creature at my side. The cub lay curled on the blanket, its breath uneven, its bandaged leg twitching now and then, as though the memory of the trap still haunted its dreams. Each time thunder rolled, it stirred, small fingers reaching blindly until they brushed against my arm. and each time I laid my hand over its, letting it feel the steadiness of my pulse. Outside, the storm was a living thing. Inside, I wrestled with storms of my own. I'd seen hunters take what wasn't theirs my whole life. They came for bear hides, for deer racks, for pelts and meat they didn't need. But this, gorillas, cages, the python, I'd never seen greed sink so deep. These men weren't after survival. They were after control, power, money. And now I was standing in their way. I walked to the window. The rain blurred the trees into shifting shadows, the valley beyond hidden behind a curtain of water. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. A bearded man with tired eyes, scar on his brow, lines carved from years of wind and hardship. A mountain man, through and through. I remembered my father then, sitting by the fire when I was just a boy, his voice low but firm. "Jack, a man is measured by what he'll stand for when standing is the hardest thing to do. You hear me? When it costs you everything, that's when it matters most." I hadn't thought of those words in years, but tonight, in the roar of the storm, they came back clear as the day he spoke them. The cub stirred again, letting out a soft moan, its chest heaving. I knelt beside it, brushed damp fur from its face. Its eyes blinked open, wide and dark, fixed on me with a trust that cut straight to my marrow. That's when the vow rose in me, unshakable, carved into my bones by lightning and rain. "You're safe," I whispered, voice breaking against the storm. "I don't care if it costs me this cabin, these mountains, even my life. You're safe. I'll see to it." The cub pressed its tiny hand to my chest as though it understood, and tears I hadn't felt in years burned hot in my eyes. I stepped back to the window, gripped the frame until my knuckles whitened. The hunters were out there. Maddox was out there. And they thought they could scare me into giving up, into backing down. But they didn't know what it meant to be born of these mountains, to have roots as deep as the oaks and stubborn as the stone. Lightning split the sky, throwing the forest into stark relief, and for a heartbeat I thought I saw figures moving along the ridge, watching, waiting. The storm swallowed them again, but the truth was clear. They were closing in. I shoved the table against the door, checked the rifle, sharpened the blade of my hunting knife until it gleamed in the firelight. Not out of panic, but out of promise. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was the cub's fight, the gorilla's fight, the valley's fight. And I wasn't going to let it fall to darkness without giving everything I had. Later, when the rain softened to a steady rhythm, I carried the cub onto the porch. The air was thick, smelling of wet pine and earth. Water streamed from the roof, soaking my boots in seconds. I lifted my face to the downpour, let it wash over me, cold and bracing. The cub clung to me, its tiny fingers knotted in my shirt. I felt its heartbeat against my chest, fast but steady. And in that moment, I wasn't just one man with one life. I was a shield, a wall, a vow made flesh. "Let them come," I muttered into the storm. "These mountains will take their side before they ever take mine." I thought I heard an answer then, not words, but the deep, rolling drum of chest beats echoing faintly through the valley. The gorillas calling through the rain. Not to me, not to the cub, but to the wild itself, a chorus of defiance. The cub lifted its head, eyes wide, and gave a soft, broken chest beat of its own. My throat closed tight. We weren't alone. I carried it back inside, laid it near the fire, and sat close, dripping rainwater onto the floorboards. My body ached, my hands shook, but my heart was steady now, anchored in something bigger than fear. I knew the days ahead would bring blood, The hunters would come, with guns and cages, and maybe the python too, slithering through the shadows as their weapon. I might not live to see the valley safe again. But that didn't matter. What mattered was the choice I made tonight. I chose to stand. The storm raged until dawn, tearing branches from trees, flooding creeks, rattling the mountains like drums of war. But in the cabin, I held the line. One man, one vow, one small gorilla whose future depended on me. And when the first light broke through the rain, soft and gold, spilling across the valley, I felt it like a sign. The fight wasn't over. In truth, it hadn't even begun. But I was ready. The storm had left the valley raw and broken. Trees lay splintered across the trail. The creek ran high and furious, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine sap. By morning, the clouds pulled back, leaving the sky washed pale, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Storms don't just pass. They clear the stage, and what comes after is worse. The cub clung close as I checked the rifle and strapped the knife to my belt. Its wound was healing, but it still limped, pressing against me for comfort. I'd planned to stay close to the cabin, but something in my gut told me today wasn't the day for safety. I wasn't wrong. It started with the birds. First they went quiet, then they vanished altogether, the trees empty as stone. A fox shot across the path ahead of me, tail low, eyes wide. Even the insects hushed. That kind of silence meant one thing. Men were near. I slipped through the trees, keeping low, the cub nestled against me. From the ridge, I looked down into the valley and froze. They were there, Maddox and his crew. 4 of them I could see, maybe more hidden. Rifles slung, knives at their belts. But it wasn't their weapons that made my blood run cold. It was the traps. Cages big enough to hold a gorilla. They moved with purpose, setting bait, fruit, bits of meat, bright cloth tied to branches to lure the curious. They knew what they were doing, and they'd done it before. And then, as I watched, I saw them fan out in a half circle, driving toward a clearing where the chest beats of gorillas echoed faintly. My stomach turned to stone. They weren't hunting blindly. They were driving them. I slid back behind a rock, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to wait, to pick the right moment. But then I heard it, the high-pitched cry of the cub's mother. Not far, urgent. The little one in my arms stirred, whimpering, reaching toward the sound. "Easy," I whispered, though my voice shook. "We'll get there." I moved fast, circling wide to come down behind the hunters. The trees closed in thick, shadows cutting deep, and the smell of iron grew strong. My boots found prints in the mud, gorilla tracks, fresh and scattered. They were running. Then the shot rang out. I flinched, heart stopping. Another shot. Shouts, branches cracking. I broke into a run, crashing through underbrush until I burst into the clearing. What I saw twisted my gut. 2 gorillas, a female and a younger male, were caught in a snare of netting, thrashing and roaring, their massive arms tangled. Maddox's men circled them, laughing, rifles raised. The mother bellowed, chest heaving, as her baby clung to her side, terrified. And Maddox himself stood near, scarred jaw tight, eyes cold, barking orders. "Hold 'em steady! Don't kill! Worth more alive!" I didn't think. I couldn't. My body moved before my mind caught up. "Hey!" I roared, stepping into the open, rifle leveled. "Let them go!" Every head snapped toward me. Maddox's grin spread slow, cruel. "Well, well," he drawled, voice carrying like poison. "The mountain man himself. I was wondering when you'd crawl out. The cub in my arms let out a cry, and the men's eyes lit up. Maddox chuckled low. "You've been keeping one, haven't you? Thought you could play savior." He spat in the dirt. "That one's worth a fortune. Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you keep breathing." I tightened my grip on the rifle. The cub pressed close. "You'll get it over my dead body." His grin widened. "That can be arranged." The standoff hung thick, rain dripping from leaves, gorillas roaring in the trap. My finger tightened on the trigger. Then, in a blur, chaos exploded. The younger male gorilla broke part of the net, tearing it loose with a roar. One hunter stumbled back, firing wild. The mother lunged, dragging the net with her, fury burning in her eyes. Maddox shouted orders, his men scrambling, shots cracking through the clearing. I fired once, the bullet slamming into the ground at a man's feet, forcing him back. The cub screamed, clinging tighter, and I spun, knife flashing, cutting the last cords of the net. The mother broke free, chest beating thunderous, her eyes locking with mine for a single, startling moment. And then the forest itself seemed to rise. More gorillas charged from the shadows, their roars shaking the air. Maddox cursed, shoving one of his men forward. The clearing dissolved into chaos. Men firing, gorillas lunging, mud flying, branches snapping. One of the hunters swung his rifle toward me. I ducked, knife slashing, catching his arm. He howled, dropping the weapon. Another came from behind, but the mother gorilla barreled into him, sending him sprawling. Maddox stood firm, cold eyes never leaving me. He raised his rifle, aimed slow and sure. I dove, rolling behind a log, clutching the cub to my chest. The shot split the air, bark spraying my face. My heart hammered. He was hunting me now, and he wouldn't miss twice. I scrambled, mud slick under my boots, the cub wailing. Another hunter lunged, but I swung the butt of my rifle, catching him across the jaw. He went down hard. The gorillas fought like demons, roaring, teeth bared, muscles straining, but Maddox's men were trained, ruthless. And then, cutting through the chaos, I heard it, the hiss, low, sinister, too familiar. From the brush, coils slid into view, scales glistening, the python. I cursed under my breath. The damn hunters hadn't just brought guns, they'd brought the serpent as well. The cub shrieked, burying its face in my chest, and every ounce of fear turned to fire in my blood. "Not today," I growled, rising to face them all. Maddox, his men, the snake. My rifle was empty, my knife slick with mud, but my vow burned hotter than the storm had. If this was the ambush they'd planned, then I'd meet it head-on. The clearing roared with chaos, and I charged forward, the cub held tight, ready to fight with every last breath these mountains had given me. The clearing was a storm of violence, louder than any thunder I'd ever heard. Gunfire cracked, gorillas roared, men shouted, and through it all came the low, guttural hiss of the python. The sound slithered into my bones, colder than steel. I clutched the cub against my chest, feeling its tiny heart pounding like a war drum. Around me, chaos unfolded in jagged flashes. Sarah wasn't here yet, and it was just me, the troop, and the madness. The python surged into the fray, its massive body cutting through mud and branches. The hunters cursed, stumbling back as its coils whipped out like living cables. Maddox shouted something, but his words were drowned by the gorilla's roars. The serpent didn't care who it struck, hunter or ape or man. It was hunger made flesh. One hunter screamed as the python coiled around his leg, dragging him into the brush. His rifle fired wildly, bullets spraying dirt until the forest swallowed both man and serpent. For a heartbeat, Even the hunters froze, staring wide-eyed at the nightmare they had unleashed. That heartbeat was enough. The mother gorilla lunged, breaking free of the last snare. Her massive fists crashed against a hunter's chest, sending him sprawling. The younger male swung from a low branch, slamming into another with bone-cracking force. The troop rallied, their fury shaking the trees. And I had a choice. I could run, take the cub, and vanish into the forest, leave the troop to fight. Or I could stand with them, shoulder to shoulder, and face what came. The cub whimpered, clutching tighter, and the choice was made. I set it down gently behind a fallen log. "Stay here," I whispered, brushing its fur with shaking fingers. "You're not alone." "Not anymore." Then I turned, knife in hand, and charged into the clearing. A hunter swung his rifle toward me. I ducked, mud splattering my face, and drove my shoulder into his gut. He hit the ground hard, and I followed with the knife, pressing cold steel against his throat until his eyes went wide with fear. I didn't kill him, but he stayed down. Another came from behind. Before I could move, the younger gorilla barreled into him, fists flying. I met the animal's eyes, and for a fleeting instant, I swore there was recognition there, a shared fury, a shared vow. But Maddox was still standing. He strode through the chaos, calm as stone, rifle raised, his eyes locked on me, cold and sharp. "You don't belong in this fight, Harlan. These beasts ain't yours to save." I wiped mud from my face, knife steady. "Then why are they saving me?" he sneered, shouldering the rifle. "Because animals don't know better." "But you do. And that makes you a fool," the shot rang out. I dove, the bullet grazing my shoulder. Pain flared hot, but I kept moving. A gorilla roared, charging Maddox, but the man fired again, the blast knocking the animal back with a cry of pain. Rage surged through me, white-hot. I sprinted forward, mud sucking at my boots. Maddox swung his rifle, but I slammed into him, knife flashing. The weapon tumbled from his hands as we crashed to the ground, rolling through blood and dirt. His fists were heavy, his breath sour, but years in the mountains had hardened me. I struck back, wild and desperate, until he shoved me off and scrambled for his rifle. And then, the hiss. The python was back. It erupted from the underbrush, coils wrapping around Maddox before he could raise the gun. His scream ripped through the clearing, raw and panicked. The serpent lifted him like a rag doll, its muscles tightening with sickening cracks. For the first time, Maddox's eyes weren't cold. They were terrified. I should have let it finish him. But the cub cried out behind me, and I knew, if I let the python grow stronger on blood, none of us would leave this place alive. The mother gorilla charged first, slamming into the serpent's side, teeth bared. The troop followed, pulling, striking, chest beating in unison. Maddox writhed, screaming curses, until the coils loosened enough for him to drop, broken but alive. He crawled toward the trees, vanishing into the shadows. But the battle wasn't done. The python turned its fury on the gorillas, thrashing, tail whipping like a felled tree. One young gorilla was struck, thrown against a stump with a cry. I roared and dove in, knife flashing, driving the blade into the serpent's scales. It writhed, the knife barely piercing, but blood oozed dark and hot. The troop fought like titans, their roars shaking the earth. Two gorillas pulled at the coils, straining with every muscle, while another beat its chest and slammed fists into the serpent's head. The python hissed, jaws snapping, striking inches from my face. I stabbed again, until the blade snapped in my hand. I fell back, gasping, blood and mud mixing at my feet. The cub screamed from behind the log, its cry sharp and desperate. The mother gorilla heard it. With a roar that shook the valley, she seized the serpent's head, teeth sinking deep. The troop rallied, pulling with a strength no man could match. Slowly, impossibly, the coils began to loosen. The python thrashed, but its power faltered. Its movements grew sluggish, jerky. The gorillas roared louder, pulling, striking, tearing, and then, with a final bellow, the mother hurled the serpent against the ground. The impact cracked like thunder. The clearing fell silent. The python writhed once more, then lay still, its massive body twitching in the mud. The gorillas stood over it, chests heaving, eyes burning. The cub scrambled from behind the log, limping toward its mother, who scooped it up with shaking arms. I collapsed to my knees, chest heaving, every muscle trembling. My shoulder throbbed where Maddox's bullet had grazed me, my hands slick with blood, some mine, some not. But the cub was alive. The troop was alive. And for the first time in my life, I'd stood not just beside the wild, but with it. The mother gorilla met my eyes. Her gaze was deep, unreadable, but I felt it. Acknowledgement, maybe even respect. She beat her chest once, a sound that echoed through the clearing, then turned, leading her troop back into the forest.
The cub looked over its shoulder as they disappeared, eyes locking on me until the trees swallowed them whole. I sat there in the silence, rain beginning to fall again, washing the blood from the ground. My body was broken, my soul exhausted, but my vow held true. The mountains had tested me, and I had not turned away. The clearing was wreckage. The python's body lay twisted in the mud, its massive coils slack, scales dulling as life drained away. Broken branches and trampled earth told the story of what had just happened, a story no sane man would ever believe. The gorillas were gone, melted back into the forest, leaving only silence in their wake. And me, I was left on my knees, soaked in blood and rain, lungs heaving like bellows. My shoulder burned where Maddox's bullet had grazed me. My hands shook so hard I could barely unclench them. The cub was gone with its mother, safe for now, but its absence carved a hollow ache inside me. I thought I was alone until I heard the sound. An engine, low, steady, crawling up the trail. I staggered to my feet, squinting through the mist. A ranger's jeep broke through the tree line, tires splashing mud. And there she was, Sarah, jumping from the driver's seat before the engine had even died. "Jack!" she shouted, boots pounding the ground as she ran toward me. "Oh, God! Jack!" I wanted to stand tall, meet her with the strength she expected, but my body betrayed me. My knees buckled, and I dropped into the mud. She caught me before I hit the ground, her arms strong around me, smelling of pine and rain. "Easy," she whispered, voice trembling. "I've got you." Her hands moved fast, checking the wound on my shoulder, the bruises on my ribs, the gash across my brow. She cursed under her breath, pulled a first aid kit from her belt, and set to work. "You're half dead," she muttered, cleaning blood from my skin. "What the hell happened here?" I tried to answer, but my throat was raw, words catching. Finally, I managed. "Hunters, Maddox, the python, the gorillas." Her eyes flicked to the serpent's corpse. For a moment, her hands stilled. "Dear Lord," she whispered, "I thought the stories were exaggerations. But this," I gave a bitter laugh that hurt my ribs. "Believe me now?" She didn't answer, just tightened the bandage around my shoulder and looked me dead in the eyes. "I believed you before. I just didn't want to." Something in me softened at that. The storm inside quieted, just a little. She helped me to the jeep, but I pulled away, shaking my head. Not yet. Jack, you need a hospital. Not yet. I cut her off, voice rough. The troop. They saved me. They saved each other. I need to know they're safe. Sarah hesitated, eyes hard, but then she nodded. She'd known me too long to argue when my mind was set. We walked the edge of the clearing together, rifles ready, listening to the forest breathe again. Somewhere deep in the trees, a chest beat echoed faintly, low and steady. The troop hadn't gone far. They trust you, Sarah said quietly. That little one especially. I've never seen anything like it. I stared into the mist where the sound had come from. My chest tightened, not from pain, but from something deeper. It trusted me when it had no reason to. That means something. Sarah studied me, then spoke softly. And what about you? Do you trust them? The question hung between us. I thought of the mother gorilla's eyes locking on mine, the troop fighting shoulder to shoulder with me against the python, the cub's tiny hand pressed to my chest in the storm. Yes, I said finally, more than I trust most men. We circled back to the serpent's corpse. Sarah knelt, examining it, her face pale. This wasn't natural. Maddox must have brought it in, God knows from where. If they're moving exotics into these woods. She trailed off, shaking her head. It's bigger than just poaching. This is organized, I grimaced, flexing my bruised hands. Maddox won't stop. He slipped out when the snake turned on him. He'll be back, angrier than before Sarah met my eyes, steady as steel. Then we'll be ready. For the first time since the storm, I felt the faint stir of strength returning. Not because my body was healed, it wasn't, but because I wasn't alone anymore. We loaded what we could into the jeep, spent casings, shattered traps, any sign of the fight worth keeping as evidence. But when Sarah bent to drag part of the serpent's carcass, I stopped her. Leave it, I said. Let the forest take it back. She glanced at me, then nodded. Fair enough. Before we left, I stood once more in the center of the clearing. The mud was churned, the air heavy with the memory of violence. But beneath it, I felt something else, a hum, a pulse, as though the land itself had taken note. The troop was still out there. Maddox was still out there. But so was I. Back at the jeep, Sarah pressed a hand to my chest, right over the bandages. Jack, she said softly, you can't keep carrying this alone. The gorillas, the valley, Maddox, you can't fight the whole world with just your 2 hands. I caught her wrist gently, holding it there. Then I'll fight with more than my hands. I'll fight with my vow. And if I've got you beside me, maybe that's enough. Her eyes softened, though worry still lingered. She squeezed my hand once, firm. Then let's see this through. We drove back slowly, the jeep rattling over ruts, headlights cutting through the mist. Every jolt sent pain searing through my ribs, but I held my breath and bore it. The cub was safe with its mother now. That thought was enough to keep me upright. At the cabin, Sarah helped me inside, settled me near the fire. She looked around at the humble place, tools on the wall, maps on the table, herbs drying from the rafters. This is you, Jack, she murmured. Rooted here, like one of the old oaks. Maddox doesn't stand a chance against that. I wanted to believe her. But in the silence that followed, I heard it again. Faint, distant, almost swallowed by the night. A gunshot. I met Sarah's eyes. Neither of us spoke. The fight wasn't over. The ambush had just been the beginning. The mountains have a way of carrying stories. A man shouts in the valley, and by morning, the ridges miles away seem to whisper his words back. That's how it was with what happened in the clearing. I hadn't told more than 2 souls, Sarah and myself, but already the woods hummed with it. By the end of the week, folks from town came riding up the mountain road, boots muddy, eyes wide with questions. They'd heard about a python as long as a truck bed, about a troop of gorillas fighting like soldiers, about me standing in the middle of it all. They wanted details. They wanted proof. I gave them none. Not because I feared their laughter. I'd been laughed at most of my life for choosing the solitude of the mountains, but because some things don't belong in men's mouths. Some truths are too wild, too sacred, to be carved into gossip. Still, the whispers spread. At the general store, I overheard old men muttering that I'd gone mad, seen shadows and spun them into legends. At the tavern, hunters joked that I'd found religion in the trees, worshipping apes instead of God. But here and there, I caught another kind of tone, soft, hushed, almost reverent. Some believed, and the gorillas, they hadn't vanished. Every evening, just as the light bled orange over the ridge, I heard them. Chest beats in the distance, low and steady, calls carrying through the pines. Sometimes I saw them too, silhouettes slipping between the trees, watching. Not close enough to touch, but near enough that I felt them, guardians, silent and sure. The cub came once. I was chopping wood behind the cabin when I heard the soft rustle, turned, and there it was, limping still but stronger, eyes bright. It made a low sound, almost a hum, and my chest tightened with something I couldn't name. It stepped closer, sniffed my hand, then pressed its little palm against my scarred fingers, before bounding back into the trees, where its mother waited. Just a moment, but a moment that burned into me like fire. Sarah saw it too, a few days later. She'd been making rounds, bringing supplies, when the troop appeared on the ridge. They stood there in silence, dark shapes against the sky. She froze beside me, her breath caught. "They're not hiding from you," she whispered. "No," I said softly. "They're showing themselves." She nodded, her face pale but her eyes bright with awe. "Jack, do you realize what this means? This is more than instinct. They're choosing to be seen." I didn't answer, because words felt small. But I knew she was right. The troop wasn't just surviving anymore. They were acknowledging me, maybe even trusting me. But trust comes with weight. One night, as rain tapped gently against the roof, Sarah sat across from me by the fire, maps spread on the table between us. She traced circles over the valleys with a pen, marking where traps had been found. "Maddox is quiet," she said. "Too quiet. He's nursing wounds, maybe planning worse. We need to be ready." I stared at the flicker of the fire, jaw tight. I've lived here my whole life. I know the paths, the caves, the choke points. If he comes, I'll know where to meet him. Sarah reached across the table, her hand brushing mine. "It's not just you anymore. The troop is part of this now. And Jack, so am I." I looked up, meeting her steady gaze. For a moment, the storm inside me stilled. The whispers reached deeper, too. I'd find strange marks carved into trees near the cabin, symbols like the serpent coiled around a cross, Maddox's sign. Sometimes I woke in the night and felt eyes on me, the kind that didn't belong to gorillas. The hunters were out there, close, watching, waiting for their chance. But the mountains whispered louder.
Every morning when I stepped outside, mist curling off the pines, I felt it, the quiet hum of life, of eyes unseen but near. The gorillas hadn't abandoned me. They were keeping watch, protectors as much as I was. I started talking to them, even when they weren't in sight. A word of thanks carried into the trees, a promise muttered to the wind. Still standing, I'd say, still keeping my vow. One night, as I stood on the porch with Sarah, listening to the distant chest beats rolling through the valley, she asked, "Do you ever wonder why it was you? Why the cub trusted you? Why the troop fought beside you?" I thought long on that. The rain drummed on the roof, and the fire inside the cabin crackled. Finally, I answered, "Because I didn't turn away." She tilted her head. "Plenty of men wouldn't have. Not against Maddox. Not against that serpent." I gave a half smile, weary but true. "Then maybe plenty of men don't belong in these mountains." The whispers grew stronger in the days that followed. Hunters came by less, but I knew Maddox wasn't finished. Folks in town avoided meeting my eye, but when they did, I saw it. Fear, doubt, and in some, respect. They might not believe the story, but they knew something had shifted. And me? I carried the weight of it in silence. Every scar, every ache, every sleepless night reminded me that what I'd lived wasn't a tale to be told. It was a bond, etched in blood and rain. The pines whispered at night, bending in the wind, carrying sounds only I seemed to hear. Sometimes it was the echo of gorilla's calls. Sometimes it was my father's voice, rough and steady. When it costs you everything, that's when it matters most. I knew Maddox's shadow still hung over the valley. I knew the fight wasn't finished. But when the cub came again, touching my hand before vanishing into the trees, I felt something stronger than fear. Hope. The kind of hope that grows in silence, in whispers among the pines. The first frost came early that year. I woke to see the meadow silvered in ice, the pines dusted with white, breath fogging in the cold air. The mountains were shifting into winter, and with it came a silence that felt both heavy and holy. I pulled on my coat, slung the rifle over my shoulder more out of habit than need, and stepped onto the porch. Sarah was already there, mug of coffee steaming in her hands, eyes fixed on the ridge. "They've been calling since dawn," she said softly. And I heard it then, the low chest beats rolling like distant thunder. Not frantic, not warning, just steady, patient. "They're waiting for you," she added. I nodded, feeling the weight of it settle into my bones. The troop wasn't hiding anymore. They wanted me there. We didn't speak on the walk. The forest carried its own language, the crunch of frost under boots, the cry of a crow overhead, the creak of ice-laden branches. Sarah walked beside me, quiet, her rifle slung but her hand never far from it. She didn't need words. She understood. When we reached the clearing, the sight stole my breath. The troop was there, all of them. The mother with her cub pressed against her chest, the young male who had fought so fiercely in the ambush, and towering above them all, the silverback, the leader I had seen only in shadows before. He was massive, scarred across one eye, his dark coat rimmed in silver like frost. His presence filled the clearing with a gravity I'd never felt from any man. The others stood behind him, silent, waiting. Sarah stopped at the edge of the trees, but I stepped forward alone. My heart hammered, but my legs carried me steady. The silverback's gaze locked on mine, unblinking, unflinching. I thought of my father's words. A man is measured by what he'll stand for when standing is the hardest thing to do. This was the hardest thing, and so I stood. I stopped a few feet away, lowered my rifle, and dropped to one knee. The cold bit through my jeans, but I didn't move. Slowly, I pressed my fist against my chest, just as I'd seen the cub do, just as I'd heard echo through the valley night after night. The silverback's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, nothing moved. My breath clouded between us, the frost crackling underfoot. Then he answered. With a deep, resonant thump, he struck his chest once, the sound rolling through the trees like a drumbeat of the earth itself. The troop echoed it, a chorus that shook the clearing, until it felt like the very mountains were alive with the sound. The cub wriggled free of its mother, limping toward me. It pressed its small hand against mine again, just as it had in the storm. I swallowed hard, tears burning hot in the freezing air. I kept my vow, I whispered, voice breaking, and I'll keep it, as long as I have breath. The silverback stepped forward, towering, his breath misting inches from my face. His hand rose, massive, scarred, strong, and for a moment I thought he'd strike me down. Instead, he touched his chest, then pointed at me, not a threat, a recognition, a pact. My throat closed tight. I bowed my head, unable to speak, because words were too small for what had passed between us. Behind me, I heard Sarah exhale, shaky but full of wonder. She'd seen it too. This wasn't just man and beast. It was something older, something that belonged to the marrow of the world. The troop lingered a moment longer, then melted back into the forest, silent as snowfall. The silverback was the last to leave, his eyes still on me until the trees swallowed him whole. The clearing fell quiet again, the frost glittering like stars scattered across the ground. Sarah stepped forward, laid a hand on my shoulder. "Jack," she said softly, "do you realize what just happened?" I nodded, still staring at the place where the silverback had stood. It wasn't just a promise anymore. It was a pact. She tilted her head, studying me. "Between you and them?" I shook my head. "Between all of us. Man and beast. As long as these mountains stand." We walked back in silence, the frost crunching beneath our boots. The whispers in the pines were quiet now, not gone but settled, like the forest itself was satisfied. At the cabin, Sarah poured more coffee, her hands steady at last. She looked at me across the table, eyes bright. "So what now?" I leaned back, weary but stronger than I'd ever felt. "Now we keep watch. Maddox will come again. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not this winter, but he will. And when he does, he won't just face me. He'll face all of us." I glanced at the ridge where the chest beats had echoed. "Because this land isn't his to take." It never was, Sarah smiled faintly, but there was steel in it. "Then we fight together." I raised my mug in a silent toast, and for the first time in years, I felt not just the weight of the mountains, but their strength flowing through me. Night came early, the frost gleaming under the moon. I stood on the porch, listening, waiting, and at last, it came. The low, steady drum of chest beats rolling through the valley. Not a warning, not a battle cry, a promise. I pressed my fist to my chest, answering in kind, the sound carrying into the cold night. And for the first time, I knew with certainty, the wild and I were bound, not by fear, not by blood, but by trust. A pact written not in words, but in the heartbeat of the mountains themselves.